Welcome to another episode of Off the Menu. I'm Vincent Franchini from Tumblr House, here with Charles Coulombe. So, Charles, word on the street is you've come out with a new book. Is that true?
Sad but true. Yes, indeed I have. I'm forbidden to tell you about the enormous royalties, but anyway, yes.
Yes, of course. Would you like to tell our audience a little bit about it and why they should buy this new book?
Well, yes, indeed I will, indeed I shall. It's called Star-Spangled Crown, and it's been described by the wise people of Wikipedia as a futuristic novel. But, well, that's true in a sense. There's a fictional setup as to how it got to where it is. Think of it instead as a civics book from the 22nd century. When the United States, these United States in which we live, have become a monarchy, for reasons that become apparent in the first couple of chapters. And it basically explains in each chapter how the monarchy of that time functions with regard to Congress, the army, the land, education, every aspect of life. But, and this is a big but, it's not really so much about a future monarchy as it is about the present. Why do I say that? Well, because every chapter follows roughly 4 currents. The first is the European roots, the European and Catholic roots of, say, education or the law or whatever the topic might be. The second is how those things were first applied in England and then altered in Britain because of the Reformation. The third vague movement is how they were adjusted here in the colonies, what was made of them after our revolution, and then what the mythical king did with them, what the monarchy transformed them into. And through the course of it, we managed to look at just about every aspect of national life. Now, why should you buy this book? Well, I'll tell you. And I would say this even though I'm the author. It will, I think, amongst other things, help you to focus on trying to see the reality of who we are as a country beyond what we constantly praise ourselves for. See, most countries are nations, and they have an existence apart from their political lives, apart from their political institutions. You say France, you say England, you say Italy, you say Germany. Those are realities that, in a sense, transcend their government. We Americans are interesting. We don't. We do not generally think of the country apart from its constitution and its institutions. So one of the major currents in this book is to try to get us to look at what America is, really is, as opposed to how she's governed, which is ironic given that it's a sort of civics book, but it's true nevertheless, particularly by contrasting what we are in the early 21st century with what we have been and what we might be. So that's one important element of the book. The second important element is to try to inject a certain amount of realism into how we approach governance. You see, every human society, and I've said this before, I've written it before, but it's very important to bear this in mind if you're going to look at the book. Every human society has the rulers and the ruled. Every one of them. The ruled being a majority, the rulers being a minority. Every society has a sort of state church, an animating philosophy. It doesn't have to be religious. With the Soviets, it was communism. There is no God and Lenin is his prophet. But whatever occupies that place in society legitimizes the ruling class and basically lays down the rules by which people play the game or pretend to play the game. Now, the United States, like any other human society, have both of those. Always have, always will. But we pretend we don't. And because we pretend we don't, everything is skewed. Everything is distorted. And when, from time to time, people wake up to certain elements of reality, as in, you know what? To a great degree, it doesn't really matter who I vote for at the federal level. My input's meaningless. When that hits me like a ton of bricks, suddenly I'm, oh my heavens, my power was stolen from me. It's the Freemasons, the Illuminati, the Jews, the Jesuits. Somebody took my power. No. Nobody took your power. You never had it. And it is a mark of the myth that we have all been taught to believe that you think you did. So, I think the biggest reason to buy my book is for a heavy dose of reality. And at the risk of sounding political, given the selection year, and given the fact that, once again, my birthday is going to be ruined by an election, it's important, I think, that we approach these things with a bit more realism than we're used to doing. Before you fly off the handle at who's elected or who isn't, before you drop friends over who they're supporting, read my book. Read my book and then ask yourself if voting for one or the other person at this presidential election is worth losing a friend for. And ask yourself where your political energies would be better spent. I think you'll probably get some insight out of reading this book, even though I don't endorse either side.
Okay, so the narrator of the book is your great-nephew, the fictional...
great-nephew.
Yeah, historian Charles A. Coulombe III.
Yes, poor kid.
How much of this, the perspective from the book, how much is him and how much is you?
Well, the afterword in 2016 is all me, as is what is called the essential postlude. That's all me. But I tried to the best of my ability to put myself in the mindset for the rest of it, in the mindset of the fictional author. I tried to think, how would he look at things? I mean, obviously, the biggest chunk of every chapter is historical. But again, every historian has a point of view. So I'm trying to look at I was trying to look at them the way he would do. And remember, the tendency for each of us, whoever we are, when we're writing history, is the unspoken idea that what we have now is better than what came before. I don't care who you are, I don't care what your system is. If you're not starving to death and you're not being beaten on a regular basis, then you kind of sort of have this feeling that what you've got now is the best it's ever been, even if you don't think about it. So, although there are some things that might give the idea that Charles A. Coulombe III isn't omniscient, I did my very best to write it from his point of view.
One of my favorite lines in it, I don't remember the exact dates, but it had to do with the foundation of the country. And you said this country, or he said, this country was not founded in 1772. Is that...
It was not founded in 1776,
yeah.
but in 1492 or 1607.
Is that him, or is that you?
That's actually both of us. I taught him well, even though he hasn't been born yet. No, that is certainly me, but it's also him. Obviously, we come to it for very different reasons. In my case, I say 1492 because one thing that I'm painfully aware of, being both of French-Canadian descent and an inhabitant of a city founded by Spain that was only conquered by the United States some 70 years after the Declaration of Independence, I'm very, very much aware of the fact that in reality the history of all the American countries is very much intertwined. And so that date goes back to 1492. But if I were to focus specifically on American institutions and all that, they go back to 1607, Jamestown. Where did we get our first legislature? Virginia. First governor? Virginia. First counties? Virginia. It all goes back to that. Your notaries public, your coroners, your constables, your sheriffs, everything that forms the basic elements of the government that you live under from the state now goes back to that year.
Yeah, that is one of my favorite points of the book that you seem to be making, is that it contrasts with the notion that when we split from the monarchy, it was a clean split, and that everything we created was totally ours. But you show that there are roots, monarchist roots, in law, in many different things.
Absolutely, because, you know, political independence did not change really who we were. Nobody's like that. If tomorrow we suddenly had to have a different form of government, I don't care what, something different from what we have now. Number one, we would not cease to be the people we are at this moment. We're the products of our education, everything we've been through. Number one. Number two, in building something new, we would use the foundation stones we already have. Even the most revolutionary governments you can think of, Russia after 1917, France after 1789, they all used the building blocks of what they'd inherited. Because what else are you going to do? You know, you can't create these things like magic out of nothing. So if today you go to the websites of Russian and French government ministries and all that, you'll be amazed to see how many of them trace their descent all the way back to their monarchs. Because when you have a new government, very often not the top people, but the bureaucrats and the lower echelon you inherit. They make the jump. There's a phrase they call it institutional memory. And every institution has one. And usually the institutions that make up a government, the memory of those institutions is longer than the memory of the government itself. The French Foreign Ministry is far older than the French Republic. Well, it's true with us too.
Okay, one of the things that you mentioned in the book that really raised my eyebrows was that Washington was offered the crown of America.
Sure was.
Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, a group of Army officers who had a pretty fair idea of the way things were going to go, and he refused it.
Okay.
Louis Nicolai, I believe, was the name of the...
Yeah, I did some very basic research on it, and he was a colonel.
Right.
So there was obviously anti-monarchist arguments saying that, well, since it was a colonel underneath Washington, that he was just floating the idea that it wasn't an actual offer from the Crown of Britain, or
from the Congress.
From the Congress.
Well, people have gone back and forth, and also there was a heavy anti-Washington element. Don't forget that.
Oh.
Washington was very popular amongst those with whom he was popular, and very unpopular with those with whom he was not.
Yeah.
So during the war, you had things like the Conway Cabal and all that tried to get rid of him as commander-in-chief.
Yeah.
He was a very astute politician.
If I remember correctly, you state that Washington rejected it on the basis that he did not have a good claim.
That was if you remember, that is the way it was put across in this future. Right. Now, how true that is another story. One of the, if you do bother reading the book, you'll find that there are certain areas just like this. Because remember, I'm writing from his standpoint, my great-nephew's standpoint. We ourselves tend to interpret history in the same way. That's the interpretation he's put on it, and there may be some truth to it. But I doubt it was quite the way, just as I don't think our interpretation is quite correct. Neither do I think his is either.
Okay. Interesting.
Well, one of the points he makes, for instance, just so you'll know, ladies and gentlemen, the new king of America is the inheritor of the Stuart claims to Great Britain as well, although he renounces those to concentrate on America. And so one of the points I make is that as time has gone on, politicians in this future day have stopped talking about how our ancestors fighting the British at Lexington and Concord, and talk about our ancestors fighting with his at Culloden. Well, you know, neither one of those phrases is really true, literally, for most of us. And the point I make in the book, and that he makes,
Yeah.
is that that kind of statement tells a lot more about the present than it does about the past. So that, elaborating a little bit, if I'm a politician, I get up about our fathers fighting at Lexington and Concord. That is the mythos that I'm keying into. That's the national myth and it's true. It's not a lie.
Yeah.
But it's also not true, not strictly. So similarly, as time has gone on, the national mythos adapts in this future, and the Jacobite thing becomes the national myth. So when they talk about our fathers fighting beside his at Culloden, well, no, they really didn't.
Yeah.
Actually, in real life, mine did. But none of mine fought at Lexington and Concord, though. But it really would not be true. And yet, at the same time, it's a riff on how these things actually happen. Think back, if you will, to the last century, the 20th century, when you had these Americanization boards in all the major cities. And you had these kids who were Italian and Slovak and German and Jewish and Irish, all these different nationalities, doing reenactments of the Revolutionary War to be Americanized. Well, again, it was true and it wasn't true. It was real and it wasn't real,
Yeah.
if you see what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And we tend to accept these things, and so does our future author.
I see. Another thing that really stood out in the book is, okay, so the monarchy is a new form of government, United States. The fictional author has written this, I don't know, how many years into the Restoration?
Well, the instauration, as they call
Instauration.
it, which is a weird word that basically means, it's a combination of install and restoration, but it's not original to me. Well, see, I was purposely vague, but I would guess, given that I am in my 80s or 90s when the instauration takes place,
Mm-hmm.
so it's roughly the 2050s, 2040s when it takes place.
Oh, okay.
The instauration. Now, our author is in his early 90s.
Okay.
So I would say it's probably around 2130.
Okay, so about 80 years or so.
Yeah.
Okay.
80 or 90, well, no, from then.
From then, yeah, okay, so...
From the instauration. So about 2130, I would say.
So the monarchy has been in place for around 80 years.
Yeah.
And the author writes that 60% of the United States is now Catholic.
Mm.
I'm sure you're using this, you're drawing from historical examples
Yeah.
on this?
Yeah, very typically, when we'll see, firstly, right now the population of the United States is something like 27% nominally Catholic.
Mm-hmm.
Now, mind you, there were a number of other presumptions in the book, which I deal with in my afterword, that may not come to pass. But one of them was that the church had regained her evangelistic mission.
Mm.
Her leadership had regained their sense of evangelization. Now, let's pretend for a second that 27% were devout in 30 years.
Okay.
Now, the king, although it's made very clear that he doesn't impose his religion, nevertheless, he is the king. He's the center of national life. The ceremony is all Catholic, or most of it, although he partakes in certain non-Catholic things. And traditionally, when the ruling classes are going a certain way, people tend to follow them. It's just the way they do it. Now, mind you, there are a lot of exceptions, but you may recall that although he makes a point of keeping the Bill of Rights, so Congress does not establish a religion, he also points out that doesn't apply to him. And you'll also notice that the states are allowed to establish religions if they like.
Interesting.
Now, I don't really go into detail of any of them actually doing this, except for one. Utah.
Yeah.
And then, as is because the governors are appointed by the king, it's immediately pointed out that while the Latter-day Saints is the state religion of Utah, no Mormon has ever been appointed governor. Now, that doesn't mean they were all Catholic, but we know they weren't Mormons.
Mm-hmm.
So that 60% figure is based upon several things. One, the king more or less doing his own kind of evangelizing. The church evangelizing. Also, don't forget, too, that there's free immigration with the Philippines.
Okay,
Which
so
will become
all their
part of the
Catholics are
United
coming
States.
over here. Okay.
Yeah. So I think the 60%, granted, I sort of pulled it out of the air.
Well, see, what I was thinking is that, or hoping, is that you were drawing from historical examples where you've gotten a monarchy Catholic government coming in and then everybody changes, or something like that.
You see that with almost any government that brings in a religion. Well, I mean, look at us. Now, our nation has a state church of sorts. It's very vague, called secular humanism. But in a mere 50 years, we have all of us, to a greater or lesser degree, come to accept it.
Oh, okay, I see.
I mean, the dominant faith of our nation today is secular humanism.
We just don't notice it as, or recognize it as a
No,
religion.
we don't
but
look at it as
rubs
religion.
off on everybody.
Yeah, we don't. It's just the way things are. And I would say that 60% of Americans, at least to a greater or lesser degree, are secular humanists. That was not true in 1960 when I was born. What are the tenets of secular humanism? Well, it's hard to say because they're very vague. It's more of an anti-tenet sort of thing. But there's certain. Abortion is a sacrament, and to question it is evil.
Wow.
Morality comes through legislation, which is why the marriage can be changed. It does have dogmas, and if you disagree with them, you're a bigot, which is like being a heretic.
That's true.
And you will be abused horribly if you transgress the tenets of our state religion. The difference between our republic and that monarchy is that its animating philosophy is readily identifiable. Ours is much vaguer, so it's much more difficult to engage with. It has no theologians, it builds no culture, it has no art, it has no music. Well, it does in the sense of being the opposite of all those things. It is ultimately a destructive thing, not unlike communism under the Soviets. It's destructive because it erodes the very basis of human society. I cannot think of, with the exception of communism, I cannot think of any other animating philosophy, state church, that is as damaging to its adherents as this one is. But it's not for me to decide. Not being a member of the ruling class, it's not up to me to decide what we're going to believe. I leave that to my masters.
Okay, last question for you today. An easy criticism to throw at monarchists is that their position is based on some pie-in-the-sky romanticism. Let's say someone said that about your book. What would be your response?
Well, firstly, it's a book, so it is fiction. You might want to be upset with Tolkien for having elves and hobbits, even though he, too, was exploring a very serious thing, the relationship of grace and free will, for all the hobbits and all of Gondor. But that aside, in opposing monarchy, you yourself, if not you, but
right.
Have some pie-in-the-sky notions. That the brightest and the best always emerge out of the ballot box, as we'll see tonight in tonight's debate between Mr. Trump and Mrs. Clinton. Republics always produce the best. Look at Hitler. That was another good one. He was elected. What's wrong with that? Monarchy has 2 millennia, 3 millennia of experience behind it. A lot of it bad because a lot of human history is bad. But it does have reality behind it. It has a record. Our sort of republic has lasted thus far for 240 years. A blink of an eye. And if I were a pessimist, which I'm not, I would look at its corrosive state church at the high quality people it produces for you to vote for, at the collapse of our economic and military structures, and say, gee, will it last another 240? Or even another 40? No, you want pie in the sky? You want pie in the sky, you go to the voting box on my birthday, and you be assured that you're going to really count for something when you do that. And then, trust me, as soon as you come out, I'll tell you all about Little Red Riding Hood.
So you're not going to vote?
Au contraire, I'm all for it. Of course I'm going to vote. Don't be silly. Not vote. Listen, I'd go see Little Red Riding Hood. I mean, as a play. I've never been introduced, so I probably wouldn't just come up to it. But no, I'm all for street theater. Don't get me. I love the Renaissance Fair. I love the Society for Creative Anachronism, and I love our elections. And I will not be deprived of the right to vote. To me, it's as important as going to the ballet.
Okay.
And I'll tell you, it is as American as apple pie. But I'll also tell you that far more important than whether or not I go to vote in the federal election is whether my listeners vote in their local elections or even know the names of their mayors and city councilmen. That's actually more important. While we're talking about pie in the sky, the reality is we get all excited about who is going to be the next occupant of the White House and tend not to care very much, unless we live in a major city, about who's going to be sitting in our own city hall. That's pie in the sky. When you've got something real right next to you and you ignore it. So, suffice it to say that I will be voting on November 8th. It is my birthday. You will see me with the little, I voted, on my, and I'll crack some jokes to the voting people, as I always do. But I will say that whatever happens this election, I can promise you this. In a year, the winner's supporters will be as disappointed as Mr. Obama's supporters were in 2009.
Well, that's, of course. Of course.
We all know that.
We all know that.
Yeah, and yet, what was that about pie in the sky? Actually, to that particular questioner, and to all my friends out there, I want to leave you with something in the spirit of tonight's debate. Happy days are here again, the skies above are... What? It was FDR's song. Gee, no?
They don't get it.
No, why should they?
Yeah.
But I'll leave you with this comforting thought. If monarchy was so good, Christ wouldn't be called President of Presidents.
Okay. Wow. Very profound, Charles.
Or not. Anyway, thank you very much.
Okay, that's it for this episode. I encourage everyone to click the link on their screen right now. Go buy Charles's book on Amazon.com. If you've already bought the book, read the book, please take a couple minutes of your time, write a review, tell everyone how great it is. Also, if you'd like to send Charles a question about the book, please contact us through TumblrHouse.com. Thank you for watching.